Hi everyone, my name's Kira Neiman and I'm the student ministry intern here. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, I guess even. I don't know what time of day it is for you, but I'm super glad you're here. Turns out last week when Brendan said I was here, he was right because here I am. And I'm super excited to be here. And I miss you guys, so hopefully I'll see you at Great Escape. And if I don't see you then hopefully I'll just see you around soon. Also, before I get into my lesson, you guys know Brendan speaks in a rhythm. I know you guys have noticed because some of you have brought it up. So, I want to know if I also have a rhythm and what it is. So, if you guys are starting to pick up on a rhythm that I have during these videos, please let me know because I am genuinely curious. All right, let's get into it. So, last week we started a new series. Brendan kicked us off by throwing us all the way back into Genesis. And so he talked about, since our new series is called Origin Story, he talked about what an origin story is and talked about our origin story as like humans, like humanity's origin story, like when God created us, like super, super cool. And so just to kind of recap that a little bit, first to start off with what an origin story is. An origin story is essentially just any experience that we have, the culture we've been in, our environment, just anything that shapes who we are. So that's like where you came from is your origin. So what's very cool about Genesis is that in this creation story, like Genesis is part of our own origin story. The origin of all of humanity is part of our origin story, and that's the same for everybody. Everybody has that same origin that came from Genesis. So, expanding more on what Brendan talked about last week, so just kind of recapping, in Genesis 1, God created the world and everything that was in it. So when he created humans, God gave us some responsibilities, and those responsibilities are to multiply, rule, and govern. And Brendan talked more about that partnership with God and what those responsibilities mean as we work with God and God works with us. So to kind of expand a little bit more on those responsibilities, I'm going to go back to Genesis 1:27, which says, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them," which is super cool. Brendan spoke into that a little bit last week where he talked about being made in God's image and in God's likeness and how that factors into that partnership with God. One thing that I really want to focus on that I think is very, very cool is the fact that one of the nicknames that we have for God is the Creator. And the beginning of Genesis is the creation story. So creation and the ability to create is a huge part of who God is. And being made in his image, he has given us the same ability to create, which is so, so cool. So I know that when you guys hear that, you're going to be like, Kira, I'm not a creative person, and some of you are. Some of you are phenomenal artists, and like, that's amazing. But that is not me, and that is not all of us. And so I want you to know that that's not necessarily the kind of creative I'm talking about. So when God gave us the ability to create, any thought that you have, anything that you make, anything that you do, any decision that you make, everything that you are owning to make as part of yourself, you're creating that personality, you're creating who you are. So we all have that ability to create, which is so, so cool, because that is literally what started everything, was God's ability to create. And he gave us a piece of that, gave each and every one of us a piece of that. And that is across the board, everyone, which is so, so cool. But part of the other responsibilities that God gave us, such as the ability to rule and govern, comes with that ability to own who we are and the things that make us us. So when you think rule and you think of rulers, you think of people that have power over others. And yes, there is that factor where Adam is naming animals and having power over those animals, but that's not necessarily what I'm saying. I'm definitely not saying that if you name something, you own it. That is not what that is. What I'm saying is that if you think of your clubs and friend groups and sports and group chat names even, like those things that you have put time into and those things that make you you, are you ruling and governing over those things? You're taking ownership of those things, just like we need to take ownership and can take ownership of our origin story and the origin story that came with all of humanity in Genesis, which is amazing. So I'm going to go into a little bit of my origin story so that you guys can start to think through your own origin story and kind of think about how that has influenced you. So some of you who know me better may know that I was born in California and lived there until I was about 13. And when I lived in California, I moved schools a lot, I moved houses a lot, I moved churches a lot, just was always in new environments, but I was always in the same state. So when I turned 13, not on my 13th birthday, but just when I was 13, we moved out of the state to a new church, new school, new home, obviously new state, whole new environment. And then I did that again when I moved here to Indiana. And so because of that, I have been in a lot of new situations, have had to take ownership of who I am and who I am in those new situations as I attempt to go as confidently as I can into those situations, hoping that by doing so, I'll get myself involved. I'll start to make that name for myself and take ownership of my new environment. And not like in a bad way, but just to kind of own the fact that I'm in a new state, just become comfortable in that, and to pursue being a new person in a new place confidently. So part of that partnership with God is that, and part of our origin story, means that because I've had that experience, I am able to use that, and God is able to use that in future experiences. So, for example, since I've moved a lot and have been the new kid, I can often look for that new kid and kind of recognize that in a space, because I want to be the person that reaches out to them, and I want to be the person that hopefully gets them connected and helps them to own their new environment, just like others helped me when I was the new kid. And I know that you guys can relate to that too, because you can be the new one literally anywhere. New class, new friend group, new school, new state. Like, there are countless opportunities where you can be the new one in an environment, and it's hard to go confidently in that. But that is how my origin story has potentially prepared me for what God has for me to do. And it's crazy to think that God's origin story for all of humanity, all the way back in Genesis 1, still applies to me now and applies to all of us in all of our own separate, unique origin stories. So next I want to talk to you about Moses, which I know you've all heard of Moses, probably a lot, and you've probably heard the story many times, and we just finished VBS on it, which was super cool. But I want to talk a little bit about Moses' origin story and what that meant for him when he became this leader that brought the Israelites out of Egypt. So, just to kind of recap Moses' story a little bit. So when Moses was a baby, the Pharaoh had made a law that said that the babies that were born had to be killed because the Israelite population was growing too fast. So to protect Moses, Moses' mom put him in a basket and floated him down a river, hoping that anyone would be able to find him and hopefully raise him as their own so that he would get the opportunity to have life. And Pharaoh's daughter finds him in the river, fortunately enough, and takes him in as her own and raises him. So this means that Moses at this point, where he was an Israelite who would have been in that slave role of injustice and oppression, was now being raised in a home of royalty and was now getting to experience a lot of things that if he had grown up in an Israelite home, he would not have. So as he got older, he began to kind of realize the injustice and see the pain and suffering that the Israelites were going through, and he didn't know how to handle it. He didn't know the power that he really did have in his role and didn't know how to fix it, but he knew it was wrong. So he runs away, and that's when he encounters the burning bush many years later. So after he encounters the burning bush and God explains that he has seen the Israelites suffering, God says to Moses in Exodus 3:10, he says, "So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God said, "I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you, that is, I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. So, obviously, Moses is probably super overwhelmed by the task he just received. God is like, yes, I know what you're talking about. I've seen that suffering, and I'm sending you to deliver those people out of that horrible position and into a new place. A whole people. That's a lot. That's a lot of people, and bring them all, lead them in this journey to a whole new place where they can start a whole new nation essentially. So Moses responds in verse 11 again, Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" He's asking that, who am I? So he's saying, I can't do that. Why me? And something that Moses really struggled with was the fact that he had suffered the way that those people had suffered. He was an Israelite, and he knew that at this point, but he didn't have to go through the same hardships that they did. So he did not feel like he was prepared or adequate enough to even be able to complete this task. So one thing about Moses' origin story, when I said that he had some advantages, were that he got an education, he got to have a personal relationship with the Pharaoh and with the royalty, and he got to understand kind of how the government worked. So by that sense, he was a perfect leader because he was able to read and write and potentially speak better than others who were uneducated could. He had that personal relationship with Pharaoh that maybe Pharaoh would listen to him a little bit, and he understood how the government worked. So he was able to lead from that sense. So while Moses felt like he had no business completing this task for God, God used Moses' origin story for something that was so big that Moses couldn't even comprehend. And that is something I think that we can all relate to, is that fact that sometimes when we're tasked with something huge, we don't feel like we are good enough. We don't feel like we're prepared. We don't feel like we've had enough of the same experiences with whatever task it is to really be able to fully understand and fully complete it. That is where I want to stress that every origin story is used for whatever God has prepared for you in your origin story. So some origin stories, like we see in a lot of superhero movies, have come from a lot of hardship and have come from a lot of sadness and anger and all of that, but not every origin story is like that. And whether yours is or it isn't, it is valued and it is going to be used. And it is currently being used. So I want you guys to understand that coming from a place of hardship versus coming from a place of less hardship does not make one more used by God than the other. Every experience that you have is preparing you for something bigger that God will use. So, as we've seen in Moses, how that huge leader, he led an entire people across the country to create a whole nother nation. And he came from a place of not feeling like he was good enough. And God said, you are, and I'm going to use you and your experiences and your capabilities to do this. And that is the same for each and every one of you. And so I want you to understand that, and I want you to kind of sit in that and go confidently in that. We are made in his image, and we have that partnership with God. And so when we are in these situations where a task feels too big and we feel like we're not prepared, lean into that partnership and know that those experiences that you've had of your origin story will be used by God. And so this week, I would love for you guys to just kind of think about your own origin story. Think about the experiences you've had, maybe your culture, your environment, whatever it is. I want you to think about how that has prepared you for something that you've experienced and how it continues to prepare you going forward. And part of that feeling of inadequacy and not feeling good enough for some of the things that maybe God is preparing us to do is just that fear that we will fail. But that is where we lean more into that partnership again and do our best to be prepared and confident in whatever the Lord has prepared for us, because he will work through us and he will use those experiences and our origin stories to do whatever he has planned. So again, I want you to feel encouraged by that, not overwhelmed, and just start to think kind of what your origin story is, how it has been used, how it will continue to be used, and all of that going forward. So again, I miss you guys. I hope to see you guys soon. Peace out.